This is the Educational Triage Podcast. Welcome. We invite you to come along with us on an exploration of interviews, issues, and other exciting and relevant topics in education, especially alternative education. They say alternative education is a laboratory for mainstream education. Why? Well, join us every week and listen in as Philip Summers
Aloha.
and I, Tony Hunt, jump in feet first to discuss issues that may affect our classes, students, communities, as well as our teaching. Please subscribe if you enjoy and find relevance in what you experience here. And if you haven't left a quick review, please do. We appreciate your candor and insights so we can improve as we move forward. Now, let's see what's on board today.
Hey, and welcome back, everybody, to Educational Triage. This is Tony, and of course, we have the fabulous Philip with us.
Aloha. That's a cool alliteration.
This week, we are looking at the topic of, are we adequately preparing teachers for alternative educational settings? So, Philip, please, if you could, remind us about what is the importance of alternative education, and maybe you can touch on why there's a growing interest in non-traditional approaches to learning.
Well, Tony,
Yes,
there's
sir.
very important things about alternative ed that we need to know. It's alternative.
What does that
Which
mean?
means that there is a not straight, wow, that's terrible. Mainstream, the straight line sort of schedule high school thing that was traditionally thought of as the educational system in middle schools and elementary schools as well. But over the years, we have found out that not all the kids can be educated to their fullest potential in those settings alone. So we need to create alternative settings for learning. And when we did that, we came up with alternative methods of teaching as well.
Okay.
And that is a system that's very important for, I'd say, a whole lot more kids that are accommodated by it.
That's true with the more programs that we have.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of them now, but I don't think there's near enough, but that maybe lead on to other questions or answers.
Actually, to be honest, there were more programs back in the 90s
That makes sense.
than there are now.
That makes sense. I was looking at some of the data and I was really, okay. I didn't put that together nationally. It makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about the origins of alternative ed, I think it's always been there.
Yeah.
I think Socrates was, when he taught his students, that was one form.
It's more perceptual. We set it up to be, there's the way to do it, and then there's an alternative way.
Mm-hmm. It's education outside the box. How's that?
Definitely outside of that big box with the gym and the football field and all that. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let's define alternative education in different forms. So before we go into some of the predominant, call it philosophies, pedagogies, formations, what have you, let's take a look at some of the attributes that alternative education actually has, if it were. So, for example, you might have an emphasis on individual development because it's student-centered. It's about working with each child. It's about having an individual learning plan for each student, setting up those goals, knowing how they're going to be doing.
Making it relevant. There's
exactly
an incredible amount of effort put into making lessons relevant.
Mm-hmm. And fostering self-confidence in the student and just allowing them to do what it is that they need to do for themselves and taking the autonomy and giving them the control and the power.
There's a different role. And that role is challenged by both the adults and the kids within the system, because When you get to a high school setting, a lot of the kids are used to that middle school, elementary role where the teacher's king. From
Mhm.
elementary, we're Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. So and so runs our class, and that's who we follow. And if she tells me or he tells me to do it, we do it. And the principal, in the elementary school is, he's the head guy or head woman, and then you get to middle school, and it's more sort of the teachers are profs, but they're sort of authoritative in a way, but they're authoritarian in a way. And you get to high school, and the alternative setting hits, and a lot of kids will rebel against that, if they're given that control. So it's kind of a challenge sometimes to work with kids, giving them the control and having them accept it.
I think maybe it has something to do with setting the boundaries.
Yeah, that's the field on which you
Because
play.
if you give me that kind of power, because
Yeah,
with great power comes great responsibility, right?
that's the
So
point.
you have the power over your education, but you also have responsibility that goes with it.
Yeah.
But you have to explain that responsibility. And they have to learn it. And so they challenge it
Yep.
to figure out just how far they can go. So they test the boundaries just like a kid would
That too. Yes.
with their
Yeah.
parents when they're 2, 3, 4, all the way up until their 90s. So, yeah, but it prioritizes the learner, and you also, with the student-centered approach,
Yeah.
you encourage active participation. And so sometimes students that enter into alternative ed don't have the self-confidence. They may have a lot of angst,
Yep.
and they may not be able to feel comfortable in that setting. So you allow them to start doing that, but you also have to encourage them to have the self motivation in order to go.
Yeah, that's what makes alternative ed tick. You can't do that in a classroom of 22 kids, 5 to 6 periods a day. You can get to a few of them. That's why a lot of those teachers do clubs and coaching, because that's where they get their small environment,
Mhm.
one-on-one teaching fix, really. And I got it every day. I had kids I knew so well. And like I said, it's a process to get them to take control, then, reel them back if they went too far. And it's so much better to
Yeah.
mentor and teach than it is. And I think alternative ed, there's an awful lot of mentoring as a way. The relationships get a lot closer than just Mr. and Ms. third period.
Yeah. I mean, you might teach a mini lesson
Yeah.
or something, but you're mentoring and facilitating, you're guiding,
Yeah.
you are checking in, because maybe a student is so focused on trying to see what they can do. And
Mm-hmm.
then all of a sudden you appear and you say, "Hey, let me help." The kid doesn't want your help. They want to test their own boundaries. And so you cue with them and you say, "Okay, what's my cue? If I raise my hand and I ask you for help, then I need your help."
Yeah. Yeah. You
So,
work it
and that's
with them.
actually a real positive kind of action for those students. And I remember the first time I heard a student say that, and she said it, she was really snarky with it. And I thought, you know what? You're right, though. You really are right. And she looked at me and she said, "Are you messing with me?" And I said, "No."
Oh, it's
I said, "You're
true.
right."
Thank you for the lesson.
Yeah. So that brings us to hands on learning. So
Yep.
you have Waldorf, Montessori, democratic, and self directed learning. Those are the 4 biggest models. They all incorporate hands on learning experiences, which provide opportunities for students to engage in experiential activities, uh, things that allow them to explore their newfound knowledge. And the data and the research has proven that once you learn a skill, playing through play and mimicking and doing things with it provides 8 to 10, I think it's either 50 to 80% more retention
Absolutely.
and better outcomes
Yeah.
of that skill than if you just have repetition
Yep.
with
Yep.
that.
And it becomes even greater if that skill is executed, while trying to reach flow states, that state where you're pushing it, but you're not going to fall or tumble, but you're not bored. You're pushing the boundaries. Your focus is intent. The consequences may be a little high,
Mhm.
and like an experiment where something's going to blow up. That's like, make sure it doesn't really hurt everybody, but when that stuff hits out through the end of the tube and blows everyone up in the air and covers everyone in this gunk, you want to make sure you're safe, that sort of thing. So the consequence kind of high, and so that gets a lot of memory retention, a lot of retention from the whole thing, and
But
that's what flow state is.
well, you have the project-based learning. You work
Yeah.
with manipulatives, and for a lot of people, manipulatives are huge.
God, I would
You
say
know, and
people, yeah.
and a lot of people think manipulatives are for lower grades. No, they're not. I mean, they work for adults. Think about this. Think what's the probably one of the most used manipulatives that is still used today and has been used throughout centuries.
A globe?
That's not a manipulative.
Is in my book. Maybe.
An abacus.
Of course. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
Think about that. It's also a fidget, right?
Oh, it is. And that's the interesting thing. Some really intense, incredibly complicated things are fidget toys. For example, I was substituting in a room, and this teacher had this camera that projected overlaid contour lines below, and then below it was like flour, sort of a dustless flour, and they moved it around and made mountains and lakes and canyons, and it instantly projected contour lines. And then if you push certain buttons, it would rain on it and show you where the water would collect and where it would flow. And so it projected water and contour lines onto this flour and made it an interactive 3D map.
That is awesome.
The kids ate it up. They couldn't keep
yeah.
their hands off of it. They would talk to each other and go, "Oh, that's a good one." And it was amazing what they learned. And I told them, "Yeah, you understand why those lines are all together when you get higher up toward the peaks." No, well, it's because the closer they are, the steeper the terrain. They go, "Oh, I guess he just got it." So they didn't know much about it. But I told them, "Oh, yeah, this is amazing."
Yeah, because you could also make that into something. Well, because you could get into technical writing, you could also get into the mathematics of the whole thing.
You could project where floods would happen. Just make a topo and then computer program, certain amounts of rain to come for certain times and see where the water would collect. It's amazing. You could do that easily.
Oh, definitely.
In high school, in a couple of weeks, you could figure that one out.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Next one is holistic learning. And this is where the model emphasizes the development of students, recognizing the importance of socio-emotional development, artistic expression, physical well-being, and character formation. And all of this goes in connection with cognitive growth. Now,
True.
I was thinking on this today, and part of me was wondering if maybe that might be what they are pushing in the classroom since the pandemic, to do more of this holistic approach, which I don't think is possible en masse.
I don't think it is.
It would be, I want you to consider, Philip, because you teach driver's ed, do you not?
I do.
How many students do you have in a cohort?
2. There's
Just
when
two?
I drive, there's just 2 students in the car.
No, I mean in a group.
Oh, you mean in a classroom?
Yeah.
It's, I believe, about 30.
Okay, and how many people are actually taking driver's ed at one time?
2 classes, so 60.
Okay, so let's say that you were told you can't just take 2 anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You have to cram 30 kids into the car. And they're going to practice their driving skills. And you're going to have to teach them. You have the same amount of time. Okay, first of all, it's illegal, right? We know that.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, the Flintstones, they just kind of pop Dino's head up the top. And
Stuffing the beetle is long gone. You know?
but if you think about it being almost the same thing, you can't possibly teach that many students at the same time the skills that you're after.
No, you can't.
Some of them might get it, but it's lost on all the others. And if you consider that the average classroom is well over 30 students, maybe up to 50 students in some areas, and I'm not talking about alternative ed, I'm talking about the mainstream.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
That's almost impossible to do for 90 minutes, 3-4 times a day, 5 days a week.
I'd say, yeah.
So that was just something that kind of wiggled in my mind. Now, when we talk about it with alternative ed, we're not talking about sitting down the students as a group. Maybe we are, but we're looking at how are we building each student, because each student is going to have their own, as I said earlier, individualized learning plan, and we're going to try to work with them. So Philip, you have high anxiety, so we're going to work with you on building your self-confidence and just working through so that you feel as though you've achieved something and you start to recognize yourself, and you recognize just the little achievements, and you realize that the people around you are actually rooting for you, but they're just as nervous as you are. So these are the tiny little things. That's part of the character development. That's part of the holistic growth of the student.
Mm-hmm.
Am I making sense?
You are.
Okay.
Is there a question?
I don't know. I was waiting to see if you had anything to add.
But, I have a lot. Yeah, I would. My mind was floating over just the fact that it's good to be exposed to emotional knowledge. The emotional knowledge that I have, I had to learn most of it. They didn't. Health class was, strangely enough, sex ed. I mean, it didn't teach a lot about why do you feel funky all the time. You know, what is that voice in your head that won't shut up? You know, everybody has it. I didn't realize everybody had that, which is commonly known as the monkey mind. But you know, I thought, what is wrong with me? It didn't actually speak out loud. Things like that. So it's nice to know as a kid, well, you're not abnormal. But as far as packaging psychological help to kids, it seemed a touch contrived, that's for sure. Because I was part of that a little bit when I was doing the subbing.
Right. But see, teachers aren't therapists.
No, that's what makes
They're also not social workers.
No, and that's also true. It's important to be aware of your mental state, but teachers don't teach that real well, generally speaking. Some do. They make that inroad through the relationships if they're a good teacher. And then they can teach it that way. But as far as I had outlets by which I could teach. I taught yoga and mindfulness, and we worked with breathing, and I brought in all kinds of stuff. But I had that small venue. If I had like 20 to 30 kids, 5 periods a day, I couldn't get them quiet enough to start to do a yoga class or to breathe. It's like herding cats in many ways. There's a certain critical point. That kind of work is best done in a smaller environment.
Right. Which brings us to the next point, which is having respect for the child's learning pace.
And that too, yeah.
So let's say that I'm working with you, Philip, and we're working in a category, in a subject that you're not really, I don't know, you're not really adept with.
Would that be math?
I don't know.
That would be the subject I was never adept at. But go ahead.
But then on the other side of the classroom, there is this other kid who seems to be just plowing through his material or her material or their material, just lickety split. I mean, they are just flying. Now, working with you, because you have a few, I don't want to call them neuroses, but you have some challenges. And so I can work with you, and then maybe all of a sudden we find ourselves in a rabbit hole, which is not too far off from possible reality.
Mhm.
But then it's up to me to figure out, how do we use that in order to get to the goals that we're after? Is there a way that I can get you to do some kind of like an archaeological dig on this aspect that might actually take us there and get the relevance? And in a sense, you go at it because now there's a newfound interest and you're trying to figure something out.
True.
So, and then I go over, and the other student, I ask them for their work, and I go over it. And yes, they're very quick. They've been very efficient. They are doing okay. They could do better.
Yeah.
But they don't want to do better. So that's going to be the bigger challenge. How do I encourage them to go back and do their work so that they can do better? And that way they can move on. Except let's say that the little angel, the speedy angel, is looking at trying to graduate by a specific date because there's something major happening in their life. And I am assessing their grades, and let's say that it's on a 5-point scale and I'm giving them 3s, and they're a little upset that I'm giving them 3s out of 5. And I say, well, okay, fine, I can give you a 3.3 out of 5 or something like that. And so, but they're upset, and it's like, okay, well, go back through it and tweak these things. Then they can do that. Because you don't want them to feel as though the diploma that they receive was all for naught, that it was just something stupid that they had to go through some motions in order to get. You want that to be something of an achievement, because it is a diploma of achievement.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And you want to make sure. And so having that facilitator and that mentorship mentality where you are working with the student, they are not working for you. They are working for themselves.
Right.
You're simply teaching them how to have that independence in order to do the best job that they can to show off what they are capable of doing. So they can take that outside and go further with it.
Sounds fair. I was thinking along the line there, decision to decision. For example, they got a 3 and the 5 is, out of a scale of 5, and they wanted a better grade. Then, of course, you say, I'll be happy. You need to make some corrections. These would be them. The exception being if it's a paper, and I did a research paper class for all the seniors who were graduating.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a process. So it was never really done until the paper was done, was acceptably done. And then the grade basically was on the content, but most importantly on the effort and the willingness to, because I tore them up. Their first drafts were like, I said, "Oh, this is," and they marked all over it, and they were like shocked and dismayed. And I went, "Yeah, fix this, do this, you got to work on this, you reword this," and they go and do it, and they do it like 3 or 4 times, and that's how you do it. And
see, you were far kinder than I would be.
Oh, I wanted to be in the process.
I tell them I read through 5 mistakes, and once I see that 5th mistake, I draw a line across the page.
Oh,
and then they come back to me and they say, "What were the mistakes?" And I look at them and I say, "You've had 11 years of school. You've had 12 years of schooling.
Yeah. I taught.
And you tell me that you know all this stuff? Show me you know it."
They had a good basic paper put together, fundamentally okay, with some errors in punctuation and some misspellings, but mostly I was just beating them up on content. Oh, expand, tell me more, show me. What's your citation? There's no page number here. It's like, it's like, yeah, have fun. And they loved it because they all felt, years later, I was told, we all felt like we'd been through the crucible with you and we'd made it. And I said, that's the whole point of it. You did.
See,
And that's making it relevant. Yeah.
I like to tell them, here's where your issue is, fix it. But I won't tell them what the issue is.
Yeah, I got to certain points. I couldn't correct the whole paper, but I'd say,
Oh, I will not
do
correct a
this, do
paper
that.
for a student.
No, no, I
I
never would.
cannot correct a paper for a student. I will point out
Yeah, I'm not
the
a proofreader.
location, the approximate location of a mistake. They have to fix it, because otherwise I feel that I'm telling them you're too stupid to find it.
Yeah, or commit to some punctuation and learn your lesson. Either you're right or you're wrong, and you'll get it right next time. But don't go,
Mhm.
oh, I didn't know, so I
Right.
didn't put it in. Yeah, it's like, no.
And that brings us into non-traditional assessment. So,
Yeah, that's
so non-traditional methods of assessment may emphasize qualitative evaluations rather than quantitative, portfolio assessments,
yeah.
observations, feedback, dis- and not just relying solely on standardized tests and grades.
Or
So because
collection.
here's what's going to happen. If you are mentoring them well, and if you get a good thing going, they should be able to do well on the standardized tests if they have to take them, if they're paying attention. But that depends on whether or not you are able to fill the gaps that many of them have. So let's say that you come to me and you have a 3rd grade math level, you have a 5th grade reading level, and you don't write. You can't write very well at all. That's a big challenge for me. So I need to figure out how to assess that. Now, I'm going to assess you on what you're capable of when you walk through the door and on your progress. So let's say that I get you to start being able to do long division. I can get you to start doing different kinds of maths, and then we figure things out, because we turn math into a puzzle. And so we figure things out. And so you're learning all your multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, and algebra all at the same time, because we can use manipulatives, we can use puzzles, we can do whatever we want, but we can find and be more creative in the way that we do that. So I can assess on how well you're handling that information, because I can constantly reflect on everything and then come back to it. And you can do the same thing too. So we're working together on this project, in a sense, of where we want to go. Kabish?
Project.
Well,
That's what
okay.
the outcome.
Maybe the project is there,
Based, but yeah.
but we want to look at the progress. We want to look at the development as you go forward. And we don't take this standardized benchmark, because we have special kids, we have our population, and now we're just throwing them back into the morass instead of holding them and working with them, so that, because for many of them that would be a failure.
I never had any problem with the basic standards, the benchmarks per se.
Oh, standards are not a problem.
No,
It's
no,
the
I just had
standardized
that.
tests.
I had the yeah. Well, and even the tests, the assessment tests, the reading and the writing, they were just demonstrations of proficiency to me, and the rest of it was too. They were targets for proficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So I never was threatened by them. The right answer, wrong answer assessments, I think, are absurd. I don't think they measure anything but specific knowledge for the most part. And that's really tough to know. It's kind of like, what does the test want you to know? Not so much what information should you have. And that's what I didn't like about assessments like that. It's like, I'm teaching to a test, and that test is telling me that it's kind of like a representation of life.
Yeah. Well, actually, the truth is, and all the data proves this, that most of what students learn in high school, they forget anyway, and it's not substantial information that they really need. The skill is what they need.
They do, and they need to learn the processes,
Mm-hmm.
how things work and how they don't work. There may be due dates in the real world. However, it kind of doesn't work on due dates everywhere. So if you're at work and you're working on a project, there's a target date. but it's not like you have to know what that is this week or it's due by Friday.
But those are amenable and they're fungible. So
Some people live on those.
that's why earlier we talked about learning at your own pace.
Exactly. Yeah. Or,
So the
or
student,
learning what you can do at your own pace and for
right.
the greater good, not just to get your points so you can get your
And
grade. Yeah.
right. And I've seen so many students look so frustrated and they say, I can't possibly get this done. Well, let's give it some more time. No, I told you this date and I want it done by that date. Well, guess what? We all learn sometimes that we aren't good judges of everything we can do because sometimes we think that we're superheroes and we're not.
That's a good lesson to learn too. If you do it one day at a time, figure out what's going to go on. Don't
True.
worry about a month from now. Just do what you need to do now.
Right. So the next one would be community and collaboration.
Yeah.
Working together on teams, working together on partners. Think about creating some sort of a community, because when students walk through our room, we tell them you're getting a fresh start. And we try to get them to get to know everybody else in the room. And if you have an alternative classroom and it's 90 minutes a day, like every other day,
yeah,
I have no words. I have no words. I commend you for doing that and helping try to make that work. But an alternative classroom should be at least 2 periods a day, if not all day.
Yeah.
Or maybe even 3. And that way the students can take another class outside, but they can work with you on getting their skills together and getting the credits that maybe they're behind, or maybe getting the skills that they need to make up. But if you think about how many times have you done a group project and everybody else bogged on you and you ended up having to do the same thing, having to do it all?
3.
So well, I think I told you the story about when I had to present something in a course.
I think so.
And I was working with two other teachers, and
yes,
and they had all the information was right there for them to present. So one of them typed it up and put it into a PowerPoint for 2 slides, went over it. The other one did the PowerPoint. And I said, okay, you two take that. I will just take this piece for myself, because there was no information. I had to figure it all out. I was having a terrible time with it. And this is when computers weren't really as great as they are now. We went in there and they spoke for 2 minutes. And I had to hold the class's attention for 40 minutes.
Whoa.
So they did 2 minutes, and then they stood back and folded their arms and smiled at me. Finally, somebody said, excuse me, I need to interrupt. Are they going to help you at all? And I looked at them and they said, you're doing just fine. And after 30 minutes, the professor stopped the class and she was livid. And I thought, boy, I'm dead. She just laid into them. And I later found out that they both ended up with C minuses.
Wow.
And one of them said, well, I'll still get a good grade. And I bumped into him. I said, how was your grade? And he said, dude, I couldn't get above a C minus. But, learning how to work together and share responsibilities. There was a time when there's a roller coaster project. Did you know about this roller coaster project?
No.
And one person does the research, and then you have the engineers and you have the designers, and
No.
everybody does a different piece of it, and they have to work together in order to bring it together. And so they work collectively. Everybody has assigned duties, and then they come together so that they can put the whole structure together. I don't remember what everything is. So everybody is reliant on everybody else, and then you can check on each person. And I had somebody who just couldn't figure that part out, and he said, I'm not sharing my information with them. I said, dude, you're on a team. He said, I'm doing all the research. They're not doing any research. And I said, no, but they're doing these pieces. He said, well, I'll get to those later. So you got to make sure that there's a connection
Yep.
up here.
I don't think people understand that.
Right.
There's
Right.
a lot of differences between high school and reality. And as soon as we start teaching more reality in the high school level,
So anyway, but just building the community where people can rely on each other and they find, you partner them for other things. It's not necessarily that they are going to have to work together on something, but sometimes when you have 3 people working on the same class, you can have them go in and they can talk to each other about it. And you might want to moderate so that they're not, possibly giving
you
each other
might.
answers. Um, but that they're actually working in that, even if they're just playing around, they're still working in that community.
Yeah.
And that's good for them. That's
Well,
good for their
hopefully
social
working in the
emotional
community is
skills.
almost like play.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm going to list, because we don't have a whole ton of time, but we're going to look at some of the different philosophies that permeate alternative ed, and those are the programs, the big 4. There's
Mm-hmm.
Waldorf education, and that is based on Rudolf Steiner, emphasizes holistic approach to education. We have the Montessori education, where they work on projects and manipulation. There's democratic education, where students are involved in the decision-making process, that they might have some student government. They do just a whole lot of different kinds of social skills, and there's conflict resolution. And then some other forms might be the Reggio Emilia, which focuses on project-based learning, exploration in the arts. Sudbury School's self-directed learning model. There's unschooling, where the student is not in a learning environment, but they direct themselves. So they learn what they want to learn without somebody guiding them necessarily, unless they ask the questions. So let's say that they want to learn more about they go to a creek and they want to learn more about what's in that creek. So they learn about the rocks, about the algae. They learn about the plant life, the whole biome that's there for them. And there's open education, which is flexible learner-centered approaches that encourage open access to educational resources, collaboration, and self-paced learning. And that would be open educational resources, online learning, and focusing on personalized learning pathways. Okay.
That sounds about right.
Okay. So what are the underlying philosophy and principles of alternative education? Well, let's start with student-centered learning.
Mm-hmm. That's one of them.
Students take ownership. We covered a lot of these. Holistic, we talked about experiential learning.
Yeah,
so this is something where if the students have internships, that's an experiential learning environment.
It is. It definitely is.
Mm-hmm.
If they have a job,
yes,
that's more than just your average sort of job, like on bussing dishes. We all had it. I don't know how much I learned, but had I had a job, say with a skilled craftsman or a plumber or an electrician, that's definitely experiential learning.
There you go. Democratic principles. So maybe you want to have democratic principles within the learning environment. And that way the students have a lot more ownership and buy-in to what's going on.
They want a voice.
Yes. And, they make the call. They run it by you as the mentor or however you have it all set up, so that they feel that they're on an equal plane and that they can bring issues. They hear issues from other students, they bring them up, and maybe you form your own student council in your environment. And you have the students kind of form their own kind of, I don't know, whatever form of government that they want to have there, whatever platform.
Said something about a formal grievance thing. Formal grievance system, that's important.
Mm-hmm.
If someone has a gripe.
Right. And then you can set up your restorative justice that way.
True.
Um,
Although, yeah,
you could do individualized instruction, whatever that looks like. Some people put down the packet. The packets are good if they have a purpose. They have a purpose as
yeah.
long as there's a meaning behind it. Just to toss the kid a packet and say, get it done, doesn't work.
If it has a purpose, not the purpose.
Right.
If the purpose of that packet is to know history from 1920 to 1939, it's not going to work. It's just, yeah.
Right. And I want to say one thing about online learning. And online learning does detract from building a community
It does.
and partnerships because it keeps the kids plugged into the computer and
Yeah.
they're not, how do they engage? They have to listen to somebody that they don't even know, bark off a bunch of facts, and then they have to take a whole bunch of notes. In fact, I find that to be completely anathema to the majority of what most kids need in alternative ed. It has its place and its purpose, just like the packets. I mean, there are some students who want that, but then you need to be able to integrate those with maybe some packets, some other kinds of learning, and that way they have a well-rounded experience, but they also need to be able to have a choice.
Two things. You said it earlier. We seem to learn more when we manipulate things, when we work with them and make them do what they do. And the second thing is when you're online, you could just open up another tab. And when you want to, just click, and pretty soon you're playing your favorite game, which is an addiction for a lot of kids. They can't handle that. I don't know, boring guy, one screen, fun game on next, click, fun game. It's just not a hard decision.
Exactly. And then we come to social justice and equity.
Yeah.
So we can work with that. If you listen to the interviews with Joe McQueen and his book, we talk a lot about social justice and equity. If you watch the YouTube videos, there's one where we talk about positive peer culture. I think that this gives the students power, and it also takes away from the need to have a us versus them mentality, especially when it comes to something like suspensions and expulsions, because it allows the students to have to deal with consequences.
Yeah, it answers the age-old question, why is punishment for not coming to school making sure you can't come to school?
Right. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense.
Nobody ever solved that eternal awful riddle.
And the worst part of it is not the worst, but one of the other poor parts of it is that they find the families, and usually these are families who can ill afford something like this, or to take the time off to go to court.
Right. It's
I mean,
definitely...
you want to talk about diversity and inclusion. We're talking about non-diversity and working against diverse groups
and complete exclusion.
And
Exclusion. Yeah, it's like, you're out of here, and we're going to charge you on the way out.
Yeah. So instead of being this resource of community and something that you want the family to feel good about, you have become almost like the central office of the Praetorian Guard.
Right, like the school, like, Tiger Pride becomes like Tiger Predator if you step on the wrong side of the lawn. It's like,
I wouldn't call it Tiger Predator. That has too many other meanings. But I would say,
you definitely goes from the, hey, we're all family, to, well, except for you. You're not
Tiger Prey.
Yeah, Tiger Prey. Or yeah, they turn into Tiger Prey is what it is.
Right.
That's the better word. Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Like they turn on you.
So let's take a quick look. And the reason why we're doing all of this right now is because there needs to be an understanding, and this goes for administrators, it goes for teachers, it goes for paraprofessionals, it goes for parents, it goes for students, and also policymakers, what alternative education is in order for it to be effective. Because too often, for district offices and for principals and for leaders, it's all about controlling those kids.
You're
It's
controlling
still
the
about
outcome.
those kids.
Yeah, controlling the outcome regardless of those kids sometimes.
Well, if you think about it,
Yeah.
it's it's
Yeah.
it
The
it's
kids.
it's progressively far more racist.
Yeah.
It works against them. And it is showing when they say, we really believe in our populations. No, you don't, because look at how you actually treat them.
Yeah. They
So
depersonalize them in an environment where they're screaming, we want to personalize everything and make sure you count.
so where we're going next is we are going to take a look at the differences between traditional education and alternative educational approaches. So mainstream education, also known as traditional or conventional, and alternative education differ in several different ways. So let's first look at the pedagogical approach. So mainstream education typically follows a teacher-centered or didactic approach, where the teacher is the primary source of knowledge and instruction, relies on lectures, textbooks, standardized curricula, and the focus is on delivering a predetermined body of knowledge to students that is delivered and executed within a specific amount of time.
That's a good one. Got them all there.
Alternative ed, they adopt student-centered pedagogies, which emphasize active student participation, hands-on learning, individualized instruction, aiming to cater to the diverse needs, interests, and learning styles of each student.
Mm-hmm. You're not done, are you?
Encouraging critical thinking, creativity, and independent learning, and having the place for that student to learn that they have a voice.
And flexible scheduling.
Yes.
Flexible timelines in the high school. Hey, the quarter's ending here. I need to get this test in. Grades are going in by Friday. In alt ed, it's like much more flexible. The grades go in by Friday, but not all of the grades per se. For example, we had kids working at certain paces, and sometimes they really liked a certain subject, and they would do a lot of it real, in one compact time, and all of their credit was in one class or two. But yeah,
right.
Otherwise our schedule was flexible. They didn't have to you didn't have to take, a certain class in a certain year, that sort of thing. And it wasn't just 9 weeks. If you could do it in 5, great. If it took you 12, that's fine.
Mm-hmm. And because I could look at you and I could say, okay, Philip, let's take a look at what classes you still need. Which one do you want to do next?
Can I do more of the history? I like history. I'm trying to avoid math like nobody's business. That's what they do too. You had to kind of go, well, we have to try the
I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
You give me 3 weeks of solid history, of solid math, and I will bring in the history.
And then we'll go, yep, that's the deal. Pretty soon they're like fighting to do the work. When I get my hands on history, it's toast. I'm going to just nail it.
Exactly. Okay, the next one is on structure and flexibility. And that's what we were just discussing, right?
Yeah, it's like that. You said that. The reason I said scheduling is that you had mentioned that before. One of those qualities of the mainstream schools was that rigid sort of scheduling, and that's just not there.
Right. Now, conventional education follows a structured and standardized curriculum. It often has schedules, subject divisions, and grade levels. Focuses on covering a broad range of subjects within a fixed time frame. As we said, there's a limited flexibility for students to deviate from the prescribed curriculum.
Right.
In alternative education, the models tend to provide more flexibility in curriculum design and delivery. They may have interdisciplinary or thematic approaches. Students can explore subjects in depth and pursue their own interests.
Individualized.
There's flexible schedules, as Philip was talking about. There's self-paced learning and individualized pathways so that the students know where they're going and they have the ownership of where they're going.
They have a clear idea of what the targets are they want to meet. And that's really helpful.
And they're still going to meet the same benchmarks.
Oh, yeah. Otherwise, we don't give them a diploma.
Right. Or they don't finish the class.
Right. Yeah, they just don't finish high school if they don't do the same work everybody else does. Well, sorry about
So
that.
they're just going to do, they might just be doing different work in order to get to the same place.
Yeah.
So, assessment and evaluation, we talked a little bit about this before. Uh, Conventional education relies heavily on standardized testing and grades for assessment and evaluation. The student's performance is often measured against predetermined benchmarks, and grades play a significant role in determining success and progression.
Usually doing on a curve too sometimes. There's an awful lot of
And
curves
assessments
over
typically focus on content, knowledge, and recall.
time. They do.
Whereas with alternative education, you may often employ diverse and more holistic assessment methods, which might be portfolio assessments, projects, presentations, self assessment, and teacher observations. And the emphasis is on evaluating the overall growth, skills, and development of students beyond academic achievement. And the academic achievement is a part of it, and it's there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the standards don't change, just the approaches.
Yeah. And the next one you referred to earlier, and I think that we can start moving just a little bit faster on this part simply because we have covered a lot of this.
Yeah.
And so if you are thinking about teaching an alternative ed, or you're wondering what you're missing or why it's not working for you, just have a listen to all of this as we've been going, and hopefully it's made some things ring true. So with a teacher-student relationship in mainstream ed, teacher-student relationship follows a hierarchical structure.
Yes.
And the teacher is the authority. And they know everything. And so the primary role of the teacher is to impart knowledge and to discipline. And to
keep order.
Keep order. Interactions are more formal and teacher-led. In alternative ed, they foster a more collaborative and egalitarian teacher-student relationship. Teachers are seen as facilitators or guides working alongside students in the learning process. So they provide support, guidance, and mentorship while respecting students' autonomy and encouraging their active participation. Now, this is actually one of the chief aspects that people cannot reconcile themselves to. They want to be top dog. They cannot give up that ego. They cannot give up that control.
They want to control the outcome of a situation.
Right, exactly.
You just can't do it when another human's involved.
And I remember I was working with somebody, this is many years ago, and we were working with positive peer culture. And one day they came in and something happened with the students, and I took care of it. And they said, "You can't do things that way." And I said, "That's how we do it. That's what we're doing." And they said, "I can't get it. I will never understand this." And I looked at them and I said, "Finally, you may be open to learning." And they were furious with me. And they began to fight back.
Wow.
So 11 years later, I was able to part ways with them, but they were never able to give that up.
Well, the fact that they had actually missed the cue from you that now you're finally able to learn. It's like you've just admitted that you have kind of a problem. You have a blind spot. Now you can look at it. And they just doubled down on it and said that not only is that not a blind spot, but we won't look at anything. We'll not examine that for nothing.
And they never did.
No, of course not.
They could not move on. If they were in a Henry James novel, they would have been killed off, because in literature, if you cannot change, if you get to a point and there is no catharsis and you cannot change, you're dead.
Unfortunately, in life, people just keep living that way, and they're very unpleasant people to deal with.
Well, they can be. And so for
Yeah.
the sake of the student, if you find yourself in that kind of whirlpool, I'm going to say, where you just cannot release that and you can't get out of it,
Hmm.
start looking for another position because that's what you need to be able to do.
One of
As
their
I've said
skills.
several times in the Tao of Leadership, the art of letting go is when you realize that you have far more power once you let things go than you did before.
And everyone knows deep in their little heart of hearts that as an individual, you want to be valued for your skills and your knowledge. And if you work under a leader who turns to you in a moment and says, I don't have this skill or that knowledge, can I depend on you? You'll go, yes, thank you. And you'll willingly, cheerfully, and full heartedly do it because that's how life works. And instead of, I don't care, nobody knows more than I do, and no one has better skills than I do, and I don't need any of you jackwagons here. Tells everyone, God, what am I doing with my time?
Okay, the last one for this component, which is learning environment and culture.
Yeah,
Mainstream education is often characterized by a large class size, standardized routines, and a focus on discipline and conformity.
which becomes the culture.
Right? The culture may be more formal, and the emphasis is on meeting predetermined educational goals and
Mhm.
benchmarks. With alternative ed, those often prioritize creating supportive, inclusive, and nurturing learning environments. Culture is often more relaxed and student centered. It fosters creativity, collaboration, and respect for individual differences. Alternative education may prioritize social emotional development, community building, and a sense of belonging.
Uh-huh.
So, mainstream education has tried to use a lot of these components of alternative ed, but believe that the student teacher relationship, the hierarchy, that is where I'm going to say the biggest problem lies because the entire school system is built on hierarchy.
That's exactly its problem. That's its purpose. And that's the reason that's its ultimate objective is to control the learning environment and administrate the curriculum to students. An
Mhm.
alternative educational environment is to work with students in a learning process that is cooperative and meaningful toward the end of a project or the gaining of knowledge. It doesn't say what knowledge, it just says, in this case, it'd be the standards, the same standards the high schools go for, I might add. But you support the student instead of administrate discipline and curriculum. And that's what's going on in the mainstream. It's just an administrative fest of discipline and curriculum. There's no life
Right.
to it. Yeah.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at the benefits and potential impact of alternative education on students. So, the benefits and potential impact of alternative education on students. Remember, we're talking about some of the most disenfranchised students that we have. We have students who have been suspended, possibly expelled, possibly. We have students who have, for whatever reason, been found guilty of truancy, or maybe they just don't fit in with their peers.
The high school just don't like them.
Yeah,
They
they're
don't like the school. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
what's really interesting is I can't count the number of students who go into an alternative program. And I know that this happens with you too, where they turn around and say, I didn't like school until I came to you.
Those are sweet words. I've heard them more than once. Yeah.
So it's almost like the fountain of youth. So,
Right. Yeah.
active student participation.
Well, guess what? If things are relevant and the relationships are good, then
Mhm.
they want to participate. They look for ways to.
It may take some oiling
Oh,
to get them to move.
because they're moody little suckers. I mean, it's
They
like,
are.
you can't be that down for 3 days and they'll start moving.
Well, you'll still get some students that still want to be in their little dark cloud or whatever they have. But
Yeah, and you just
you do your best, but you still foster that relationship. And
yeah,
even if it's just their interaction with you,
yeah.
you're good to go.
That's exactly it. Even though they, yeah, although if they know that you care and that, yeah, they know you've been down for
Mhm.
3 days. Oh,
Yeah,
he's been
because
caring too.
you don't know every student's backstory.
No, I don't. And it's a
So
lot more than my 11. What was it? 9 to 13% influence we have on them, or some silly number like it's.
no, we have a 1 to 14%.
Is that it? Just one. The one thing's killing me. One. I only got one. I know the 14. The one I can't accept. My mind rejects
Well, I
that.
have a feeling that the one is those are the kids that just aren't there.
I guess because I just can't believe I only had a 1% effect. I work
Okay,
hard.
okay. Holistic development, and we
uh,
talked about that. That's
yeah,
their emotional, social, and physical well-being,
yeah, all
where
of
they
it.
can incorporate art, music, movement, experiential learning, nurturing creativity, emotional intelligence, and overall well-roundedness. And then we have flexible curriculum and pace. We talked about that, where they can delve, like you going into your rabbit hole in math, and
Yeah,
you get to play archaeologist. And so there's a lot that might come up with
I
that.
would love that. Yeah, actually.
The flexible curriculum and pace. We've spent a lot of time on that. Enhanced social skills and community engagement. We spent time on that, where um, as opposed to just being a number or being lost in the crowd, you're actually a participant. You're actually a vital member of this community, and the biome actually takes effect.
Right.
And you have, it doesn't matter which alternative program I'm working with, it happens all the way around. Everybody knows everybody for the most part. Maybe they don't know their name, but they know who they are. So, which is much better because you can't get lost in an alternative program.
No, you shouldn't be able to be.
Right.
That would
So,
defeat the purpose in a lot of ways if you got lost there.
and you also are involved in the decision making, and you have the social, emotional, or the social responsibilities that go along with that. And it's not that all of a sudden you're imbued with these with all of these talents in order to handle all of that, but you have an opportunity to learn them. And as you practice them, then once you go out into the community, they'll stay with you. And it can give you a
Right.
sense of justice. It can give you a sense of not entitlement so much, but that you have an air of confidence about you because you kind of know what it is that you're doing.
That
And
was the word that occurred to me, confidence. Yeah.
yeah, increased creativity and critical thinking.
Well, I mean, if you're in charge of what it is you're going to critically think about and imagine, you tend to be a little bit more focused and a little bit more involved with
Right, because you're feeding your curiosity,
it.
right?
Right. It feels good. It's what's known as autotelic, addictive. Yeah.
Yeah, and many of our students are highly creative, and so they think widely out of the box. And
Mm.
so sometimes that has always been debilitating in mainstream classrooms rather than something that they can work with, and they can kind of take that and go somewhere with it. Or maybe they have an interest that you hadn't thought of, but maybe it's their interest.
Yeah.
And so you and they can go down another path. So, potential impacts can depend on the specific approach and individual experiences. Some potential considerations to consider would be transition challenges.
Hmm.
Students transitioning from traditional schools to alternative or vice versa. If a student is going from alternative ed into the mainstream, that may be very difficult for them because it's a completely different learning environment. You're going from someplace that we would hope is warm and cozy and works with them to something that is rather cold and just a machine.
Yeah, we already determined the objective of the mainstream is
Mhm.
to keep discipline and administer curriculum.
Right. And then limited exposure to certain subjects,
Yeah.
where you could do exploration in alternative ed and you could gain deeper knowledge, and you can't do that in a mainstream classroom.
It's
Yep.
it's interesting to note the insistence upon doing one's own thing. Like I want to learn about this, and everyone's looking at that, going, "No." They kind of look like a troublemaker. So the the very enthusiastic learner who doesn't quite have the social skills to express them quite well becomes a troublemaker real quick in that environment. It's kind of
Well,
sad.
once again, we're talking about ego, control, and domination.
Yeah, it's like, you don't understand, kid. I got a schedule to meet, and you doing a project on that particular thing. Don't meet the schedule. That's not something I'm going to do. Yeah.
Right. And, recognition and alignment with traditional systems. They don't get the recognition as maybe they would if they were working with you, Philip. Maybe in your class of 12 to 15, that they could get some kudos, that they could get some good jobs as they're working on something, or even just having the knowledge that you're there working with them because they're working full time to help support their family, and they've got all these other things going on outside of school.
Mm.
And you're not giving them extra work to do outside of school. And so the fact that they can get that work done, and they have that ownership of what they're doing, whereas
Yeah.
you have Simon Legree, in a sense, lording over you, telling you that you must do these things if you're going to get there, without any consideration of what your life circumstances are.
50% of the grade is the homework. You figure out how to get it done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's essential to consider that the benefits and impacts of alternative education can be subjective and dependent on individual student needs. But that's what we're emphasizing, is that it's about the student.
It's always subjective about the student or the subject.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's never about me.
And so the next piece that we were going to get into would be the gaps and challenges of providing comprehensive training for teachers in alternative education. But instead, because we've really run over time, I want to save that for next week.
Yeah, that's a good
idea.
idea.
When we do part 2. So let's look at what we talked about so far this week, right?
Let's do it.
Okay.
A bunch of it. I want to hear it.
Well, we defined alternative education in its various forms. We looked at non-traditional. We talked about what are the differences between alternative education and mainstream education. We talked about some of the pedagogies. We talked about some of the overreigning influences of what we're talking about. And I think we also talked about, and I love the way that McQueen talked about it, which was leave your ego at the door.
Yeah.
Leave your ego at the door.
If you had to make it like one sentence thing, that would be it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And know that it's about the students. And if they lash out at you, maybe because you allowed them to feel safe about lashing out against you.
Yeah. If they feel secure enough to chew you out unreasonably out of nowhere, they love you.
They do.
They do. They feel secure.
Right. So next week, what we're going to do is we are going to start off with talking about the gaps in teacher training that would benefit teachers in order to work in alternative education, so that we could have more teachers who actually knew what they were doing and not just getting the on-the-job training that they really don't get, and they have no idea what they're doing. And so it's the reason why things come out so cockamamie sometimes, and you have other groups who take over and say we're alternative ed, and they are anything but.
We have answers to those questions.
Well, I'm glad you
what people should be taught and why the systems don't work once they get out
there. So we're going to be talking also about addressing all the different challenges that face teachers when they come into alternative ed. So that being said, Philip, thank you so much
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to next week. And to all of our viewers and our listeners, thank you. We'll see you next week.
Aloha.
Bye-bye.